This is the story of Grace, a woman who was left to die at the mercy of a raging river, yet chose to fight for her daughters even when the world turned against her. Grace lived in a small village where poverty hung over every hut like a stubborn cloud. The soil was dry, and the little her husband earned from fishing and odd jobs disappeared quickly into bottles of palm wine and the hands of other women. While Grace spent her days working, patching old clothes, pounding yam for neighbors, and doing menial labor just to feed herself, her husband Daniel wandered from bar to bar, careless and cruel. Before we go on, please I would like to ask that you kindly subscribe to the channel, like the video for more great stories and leave a comment as well. It would mean so much to me. Grace was barren for many years. That word, barren, was like a curse in her community. Women would whisper behind her back, children would tease her in the market, and even Daniel used it as a weapon against her. "You are nothing without a child," he would spit at her after returning drunk. "Other women give birth to sons, strong sons who carry their father's name. But you sit here like a tree that will never bear fruit." Grace would quietly wipe her tears, clinging to the hope that one day, God would remember her. Then, after years of waiting, something changed. Grace missed her monthly flow. Days stretched into weeks, and her body began to swell with new life. She went to the local midwife, who confirmed her greatest dream: she was pregnant. Grace ran home barefoot, her face brighter than the morning sun. She imagined Daniel lifting her in joy, imagined his heart softening, imagined his cruel words turning into gentle ones. When she told him the news, his expression shifted, first surprise, then suspicion, then a smirk. "Well," Daniel said, leaning back lazily, "this child better be a boy. Do you hear me, Grace? A boy. Because if it's another disappointment, don't expect me to waste my life feeding it." Grace's heart sank. Still, she whispered to herself, "At least he didn't throw me out. Maybe once he sees the child, he will change." Months passed. Grace endured the weight of her belly, the weight of her husband's insults, and the weight of the villagers' mockery. Daniel never bought her a single wrapper or plate for the unborn child. Every coin he earned vanished into drink. Grace survived by the kindness of neighbors and her own strength. When the time for delivery came, Grace screamed through the night. Her cries echoed through the small hut as the midwife worked tirelessly. Sweat soaked her body, and she clutched her mat, praying for strength. Finally, the cries of not one, but two babies, filled the room. Twins. Two tiny, perfect girls. Grace's heart nearly burst with joy. She kissed their soft faces, whispering blessings over them. "You are my stars, my jewels, my answered prayer." But Daniel's face darkened the moment he saw them. "Girls," he thundered. "Two useless girls? After all these years, this is what you bring me?" He stormed out, leaving the midwife trembling. Grace held her daughters tighter, whispering, "I will love you enough for both of us." But Daniel's anger only grew. Each day, he sneered at the babies, refusing to touch them. He spent nights with other women, coming home smelling of sweat and wine. Soon, Grace began to fear the look in his eyes, cold, sharp, calculating. And then came the night when his cruelty crossed a line Grace never imagined. The night was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that warns of danger. Grace sat in the corner of their hut, nursing her twins. The moonlight fell on their little faces as they slept peacefully, their soft breaths warming her chest. For a brief moment, Grace allowed herself to dream that life might get better, that Daniel might finally see their worth. But Daniel had been drinking more than usual. His eyes had grown wilder, his words sharper. That night, he stumbled in, reeking of alcohol, his face twisted with rage. "I warned you, Grace," he growled, his voice thick with bitterness. "I told you, I needed a son to carry my name. But you cursed me with girls. 2 of them. What use are they to me?" Grace trembled, clutching her daughters. "They are children, Daniel. Gifts from God. They are yours too." "Silence," he roared, striking the wooden table so hard the clay cup on it shattered. His shadow loomed over her like a storm. "You have shamed me enough. Tonight, I end this disgrace." Before she could react, Daniel lunged forward. He tore the babies from her arms, their cries piercing the air. Grace screamed, falling to her knees, but he shoved her aside. His grip was cruel, his mind clouded with drunken cruelty. He tied a cloth around Grace's mouth to muffle her screams. With ropes, he bound her wrists. "You will not curse me any more," he hissed. "The river will swallow you and these useless girls. And when the villagers ask, I will tell them you ran away. No one will ever know." Grace's heart shattered as he dragged her and the babies through the darkness. Her tears soaked the earth, but no neighbor dared to step out. Everyone feared Daniel's temper. The twins wailed in confusion, their cries echoing into the night. At last, they reached the riverbank. The water was restless, waves slapping against the rocks as though warning of what was to come. Daniel shoved Grace into a canoe, dumped the twins beside her, and pushed the canoe far into the current. Grace struggled against her bonds, muffled sobs breaking through the cloth tied around her mouth. She looked at Daniel one last time, but there was no love in his eyes. Only hatred. With a final push, he let the river claim them. Then he turned away, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. The canoe drifted into the heart of the river. The water roared, pulling them farther and farther from the village. Grace felt the rough wood scrape against her wrists as she struggled, desperate to free herself. The twins cried louder, their tiny voices swallowed by the rush of water. In that moment, Grace knew she had to choose, her life or her daughter's survival. Her body trembled with fear, but her heart was steady with love. She leaned forward, using her teeth to tug at the ropes binding her wrists. Her lips bled, her jaw ached, but she bit and pulled until at last the ropes loosened. Her hands were free. She tore the cloth from her mouth, gasping for air. The canoe rocked dangerously, but she paid it no mind. She gathered her babies, kissing their foreheads. "My darlings," she whispered, "if this river must take someone, let it take me. But not you. Never you." The current grew stronger, pulling them toward the roaring heart of the river where sharp rocks jutted out like fangs. Grace's eyes darted around until she spotted a fallen log drifting nearby. Summoning all her strength, she laid her babies on the log, tying their small bodies securely with the torn cloth from her waist wrapper. The twins screamed, reaching for her, but she pushed the log away, letting the current carry them toward calmer waters near the riverbank. Her arms shook with exhaustion, but her eyes burned with determination. She prayed silently, "Let someone find them. Let someone save them. Let them live, even if I do not." But as she did this, the canoe struck a hidden rock. It splintered, tossing Grace into the furious waves. The water swallowed her, dragging her down, spinning her into darkness. She fought with every ounce of strength, her lungs burning, her vision blurring. All she could think of was her daughters' faces, their cries, their little hands reaching for her. And then, silence. Grace felt her body surrender to the river. But fate was not done with her story. The night deepened, and the forest surrounding the river grew still. Only the roar of the rushing water broke the silence, carrying with it the cries of two helpless infants. On the far side of the river, a hunter named Thomas was returning from a long day's journey. His bow rested across his back, and a bundle of small game hung from his belt. Thomas was a man known for his sharp eyes and steady hands, but above all, he was known for his compassion. Though he lived alone in a small hut near the forest edge, he never ignored a cry for help, whether from man or beast. That night, as he made his way along the riverbank, he paused. At first, he thought he had imagined it, the faint wail of babies carried on the wind. He frowned, straining his ears. Again, the sound came, fragile but urgent. His heart quickened. "No child should be near this river at this hour," he muttered to himself. "What madness is this?" Dropping his bundle, he sprinted toward the sound. His feet thudded against the wet earth, his eyes scanning the swirling currents. And then to his disbelief he saw it, a log drifting downstream, and on it, two tiny bundles squirming and crying. "By the heavens!" Thomas gasped. Without hesitation, he waded into the water. The current tugged at his legs, threatening to sweep him off his feet, but he pressed on, his eyes locked on the helpless children. Each step was a battle, each movement a fight against the river's fury. At last, he reached the log. With trembling hands, he gathered the twins, clutching them against his chest. Their tiny faces were wet with tears, their cries hoarse with fear. Thomas whispered, "Hush now, little ones. You are safe. I have you." But just as he turned to head back to the shore, another sight froze him in place. A woman, her body limp, her hair spread like dark ribbons, floated not far behind. She was caught between waves, her face pale, her limbs weakly thrashing. Thomas's heart lurched. No, she must be their mother. Balancing the babies carefully on his shoulder, he plunged deeper into the water. The river clawed at him, dragging him under, but he refused to let go. He reached the woman just as her body began to sink. With one arm, he seized her, pulling her against him. She was unconscious, her skin cold, her breath shallow. Hold on, he growled through gritted teeth. Don't you dare leave them now. Don't you dare. Step by step, he fought his way back to the shore, his muscles screaming with effort. By the time he collapsed on the riverbank, all three, the woman and her daughters, were sprawled on the grass, drenched and trembling. The twins cried faintly, their tiny hands curling around his shirt. But the woman lay silent, unmoving. Thomas pressed his ear to her lips. There was a whisper of breath, but fading fast. No, he whispered fiercely. You will not die tonight. He quickly set the twins on his cloak, wrapping them in the driest fabric he had. Then he turned to the woman. Pressing his hands to her chest, he pushed, urging her lungs to remember how to breathe. He tilted her head back, breathing into her mouth, again and again, refusing to give up. Minutes passed like hours. Then suddenly, she coughed, sputtering out river water. Her chest heaved, her eyes fluttered open. She gasped for air, her body shivering violently. Thomas let out a shaky laugh of relief. Good. You are stronger than the river. Stay with me. Her eyes, weak but full of fear, darted immediately to her children. She tried to sit up, her voice breaking as she whispered, My babies, where are my babies? Thomas gently lifted the twins into her arms. Their cries softened as they felt her warmth again. Grace clutched them to her chest, sobbing into their tiny heads. They live, Thomas said softly, his hand steady on her shoulder. And so do you. Whatever storm brought you here, it has not won. Not tonight. Grace looked at him, her lips trembling. She wanted to thank him, but words failed her. Instead, tears of relief streamed down her face. Thomas studied her with quiet concern. The rope still hung loosely around her wrists, the bruises on her skin telling a story of cruelty. He had seen many tragedies in his life, but something about this woman and her daughters stirred a fire in his soul. He stood, lifting his bow and cloak. Come, he said firmly. This river tried to take you, but it did not succeed. You and your children will not sleep in the cold tonight. I will take you to my hut. You will rest. You will heal. Grace hesitated, still trembling, but when she looked at her daughters' innocent faces, she knew she had no choice. With Thomas's strong arm guiding her, she rose unsteadily, clutching her twins close. The forest closed around them as they walked, the sound of the river fading behind. Grace glanced back once, her heart heavy. That river had almost been her grave, but it had also been the place where her children were saved. And though she did not yet know it, her life was about to take a path she could never have imagined. Thomas's hut stood on the edge of the forest, a modest shelter built from mud walls and a roof of palm leaves. It was not grand, but it was warm, and most importantly, it was safe. That night, as he led Grace and her twins inside, the flicker of his small fire cast a golden glow across the room. Grace sank to the floor, still clutching her children, her body trembling from exhaustion. Thomas quickly fetched dry cloth and laid it near the fire. Change into these, he said gently. The cold has teeth tonight, and I will not let it bite you. Grace hesitated, her pride and shame wrestling within her, but Thomas's eyes held no judgment, only quiet resolve. Slowly, she wrapped herself and the twins in the dry cloth. Their tiny bodies pressed against her chest, their breathing steady, and for the first time since her ordeal began, she felt a spark of safety. Thomas busied himself with cooking. He set a pot over the fire, dropping in yam slices and a sprinkle of herbs he had gathered earlier. The rich aroma soon filled the hut. When the food was ready, he set a bowl before Grace. Eat. You need strength if you are to care for them. Grace looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Why are you helping us? She whispered. Thomas sat across from her, leaning his elbows on his knees. His face was weathered from years in the wild, but his voice was calm. Because the river tried to take you, and I could not let it win. Because no man with a soul leaves children to drown. And because sometimes, he paused, looking into the flames, the gods place people in our path for a reason. Grace lowered her gaze, her heart swelling with gratitude and sorrow all at once. She had known cruelty, betrayal, and abandonment from the man who vowed to protect her. And now, here was a stranger offering kindness without asking for anything in return. She ate slowly, feeding small pieces of yam mash to the twins. Their tiny mouths opened eagerly, their whimpers turning into soft coos. Watching them, Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest, a reminder that though her world had shattered, these two little souls gave her a reason to live. Days passed, and the rhythm of life in Thomas's hut began to heal the wounds of the past. Grace grew stronger, her color returning, though the bruises on her body and spirit would take longer to fade. She spent her mornings tending to the babies, humming lullabies as she rocked them in her arms. The twins, delicate yet spirited, filled the hut with their cries and laughter. Thomas, though often away hunting, always returned with food and herbs. He never spoke much of himself, but he made sure the fire never died, the water pot never ran dry, and the hut never lacked comfort. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of crimson, Grace sat outside the hut with her twins nestled in her lap. She named them Hope and Faith, names that reflected the light she had clung to in her darkest hour. Thomas emerged from the forest, carrying firewood on his shoulder. He paused, watching her. The sight of Grace, her face softened by the glow of the sunset, the twins cooing in her arms, it stirred something deep within him. Something he had buried long ago. "You have named them?" he asked, setting the wood down. "Yes," Grace said softly. "Hope and Faith. For without hope, I would have surrendered to the river. And without faith, I would never believe that we could still have a future." Thomas nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Strong names. They will carry those names like torches in the dark." Grace looked at him then, truly looked. His face was rugged, his hands scarred from labor, yet his spirit was gentle. For the first time since her husband had cast her aside, she felt the weight of despair lift, replaced by something fragile but growing, trust. Seasons shifted. The forest bloomed, the river swelled, and the twins grew into lively little girls. Their laughter echoed through the trees as they toddled around the hut, chasing butterflies and tugging at Thomas's hunting bow when he wasn't looking. Grace often watched them with tears in her eyes. She remembered the night when the river had almost swallowed them, when she had given her last strength to keep them afloat. And now to see them thriving, it felt like a miracle. Yet beneath her joy, a shadow lingered. She never spoke of her husband to Thomas, never revealed the cruelty that had nearly ended her life. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the twins were asleep and the fire crackled low, she wondered if he still walked the earth, if he would one day come searching. Thomas seemed to sense her unspoken fears. One night, as they sat by the fire, he said simply, "Whatever ghosts you carry, leave them to the past. This place is yours now. You and the children are safe here." Grace looked at him, her throat tightening. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that safety could last. But deep inside, she knew that men like her husband did not let go so easily. For now though, she chose to cling to peace. For now, she chose to believe in hope and faith, the name she had given her daughters, and the strength they had given her heart. The years drifted by like leaves upon the river. Hope and faith grew quickly, their laughter becoming the song of the forest. By the time they were 6 years old, the once quiet hut was alive with chatter and mischief. Hope, the elder twin by only a few minutes, was bold and curious. She often wandered too far, chasing after colorful birds or asking Thomas endless questions about the world beyond the forest. Faith, on the other hand, was gentler, her voice soft as a whisper. She loved to sit by the riverbank, weaving flowers into crowns and singing songs her mother taught her. Though different in spirit, the bond between them was unshakable. If Hope scraped her knee, Faith was the first to comfort her. If Faith grew shy, Hope would step forward, fierce as a lioness, to defend her. Grace often marveled at them, her heart swelling with pride. Thomas, too, grew attached to the twins. He taught them how to climb trees, how to fish with their bare hands, and how to listen for the language of the forest. The girls followed him like shadows, their giggles ringing through the trees as they tried to mimic his steady steps. At night, when the forest hummed with crickets, Grace would tell the twins stories. Tales of brave women who defied kings, of rivers that tested the courage of mortals, of mothers who gave everything for their children. She never spoke of the night she was left to die, but the lessons she wove into her stories carried pieces of her truth. One evening, after a long day of gathering fruits, Hope asked, "Mama, why do you always tell stories about strong women? What about fathers?" Grace froze, the question piercing her heart like a spear. She looked into the wide, innocent eyes of her daughters. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the hut. Then she smiled faintly, though her chest ached. "Because, my loves, sometimes it is women who hold the world together when it is breaking apart." The twins nodded, accepting her answer, but Thomas, sitting quietly by the fire, caught the flicker of sorrow in her eyes. Life was simple, yet beautiful. But peace, as Grace had feared, does not always last. Far away, in the village Grace once called home, whispers began to stir. Her husband, Daniel, walked with a restless shadow. He had told the villagers that Grace had been sent away, that she had left him to pursue a better life elsewhere. But the lie wore thin. Too many eyes had seen him return alone from that journey by the river. Too many tongues questioned his story. Daniel grew bitter. His nights were drowned in alcohol, his coins spent on women who mocked him behind his back. Age crept into his face, and with no son to carry his name, he felt his pride wither. Yet one thought haunted him more than all: what if Grace and the twins had survived? The thought festered until it became an obsession. He began to ask questions in secret. Hunters who roamed far spoke of a woman and 2 girls living near the edge of the great forest. A woman who matched Grace's description. One evening, as the moon hung pale over the village, Daniel stood alone, his fists clenched. "If she lives," he muttered, his voice dripping with venom, "then she has shamed me before all men. She will not raise those girls to rise above me." And so, with a heart twisted by anger, he began to plan. Back in the forest, Grace felt a strange unease, though she could not explain why. She often caught herself staring into the trees, her ears straining at every snap of a twig, her arms tightening around her daughters as though the wind itself might steal them away. Thomas noticed. "You are troubled," he said one night. Grace hesitated, then spoke. "Sometimes I feel as if shadows are watching us. As if the past has not finished with me." Thomas reached for a stick and stirred the fire. Sparks rose into the dark like tiny stars. Shadows can only harm those who turn their back on the light. "Whatever comes, you are not alone this time." His words soothed her, but deep in her heart, Grace knew. The river had spared her once, but storms were brewing again. The sun had just begun to rise over the great forest when a hunter, weary from his long journey, paused by the riverbank near Thomas's hut. He had traded in Grace's former village and carried with him tales that made her blood run cold. "People are talking," the hunter said, his voice low as though the trees themselves were listening. "They say a man called Daniel walks the village like a restless spirit. He asks about a woman and her children. He says he will not rest until he finds them." Grace's hands trembled as she gripped the clay pot she was washing. Thomas glanced at her, reading the fear etched across her face. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Thomas spoke plainly. "It seems your past has found us. What will you do if he comes?" Grace's voice quivered, though she tried to steady it. "I will protect my children. Even if it costs me my life, I will not let him harm them." Thomas placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "You will not face him alone this time. The forest is my home, and here, he will find he is not the only one with strength." Daniel's journey through the forest was long and treacherous. His heart was a nest of anger and wounded pride. The memory of Grace's face, calm, defiant even in despair, haunted him. He told himself he sought justice, that she had betrayed him by surviving when he had cast her away. But deep within, what gnawed at him most was shame, the thought that others might see him as a man defeated by a woman. When at last he drew near the clearing where Thomas's hut stood, Daniel hid among the trees. He saw the twins playing in the open space, their laughter carrying in the wind. For a moment, something twisted in his chest. Were these not his blood? But instead of softening, the thought enraged him further. "They live because she defied me," he spat under his breath. "And now they will grow to shame me before the world." His eyes burned with fury as he plotted his next move. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in strokes of crimson and gold, Thomas noticed unusual silence in the forest. The birds that usually sang before nightfall were quiet, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. His instincts sharpened, danger was near. He turned to Grace. "Keep the children close tonight." But Daniel had already made his approach. Just as the fire in the hut began to glow against the night, there came a heavy knock at the door. Grace's heart nearly stopped. She knew that sound. Slowly, the door creaked open, and there he stood, Daniel. His face was older, harsher, but his eyes burned with the same cruelty she remembered. For a moment, silence filled the room. Hope and faith clung to their mother's skirts, their small bodies trembling. So, Daniel sneered, stepping forward. You live. And you dared to raise these girls against my will. Grace stood tall, her voice firm though her body shook. These children are mine. And nothing you do will change that. Thomas rose, placing himself between Daniel and the family. His presence filled the room like a wall of stone. You will not touch them, he said calmly. Daniel laughed, though the sound was bitter. And who are you? Another fool to be ruined by her weakness. Thomas's eyes narrowed. I am the man who found them when you threw them away. I am the man who chose to protect, not destroy. The fire crackled between them, shadows dancing on the walls. For the first time, Daniel realized that taking back what he had abandoned would not be as simple as he thought. But his pride, swollen like a festering wound, would not let him retreat. This is not over, Daniel hissed, backing toward the door. You will regret standing in my way. And with that, he vanished into the darkness of the forest, leaving behind the promise of a storm. Grace sank to her knees, clutching her daughters. It has begun again, she whispered. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. No. This time, it will end. But even he knew deep down that the battle ahead would test them all. The days after Daniel's return were heavy with fear. Grace barely slept, listening to every sound in the forest at night. Thomas sharpened his arrows and strengthened the walls of the hut, but both knew that no barrier of wood or stone could hold back a man consumed by vengeance. The twins, Hope and Faith, though still young, began to sense the storm in their mother's heart. One evening, as Grace sat by the fire staring blankly at the flames, Hope crawled into her lap. Mother, she whispered, are we going to die? Grace held her close, tears burning in her eyes. No, my child. You will live. Even if I must give everything I have, you will live. Faith placed her small hand over her mother's. Then we are not afraid. Because you are strong. Their words, innocent yet powerful, poured strength back into Grace's weary soul. She realized that she could no longer cower. She must face what was coming, not for herself, but for her daughters. On the 7th night after Daniel's return, the storm finally broke. The wind howled through the trees, and the river roared louder than ever before. Grace woke to the sound of wood splintering. The door to the hut burst open, and Daniel stormed in with a club in his hand, his face twisted with rage. You thought you could hide from me forever, he snarled. Tonight it ends. Thomas leapt forward with his spear, but Daniel was quick, striking him hard across the shoulder. The two men clashed fiercely, their bodies crashing against the hut walls. Sparks flew as the fire spilled from the hearth, flames licking up the dry wood. Take the children. Thomas shouted. Grace gathered Hope and Faith and ran toward the riverbank. Her heart pounded as memories of her first abandonment returned, the cold water, the hopelessness, the silence. But now she was not the same broken woman. She was a mother who had survived, who had fought, who had promised her daughter's life. Behind her, Thomas and Daniel continued their battle. Thomas fought bravely, but Daniel's fury gave him a wild strength. With a brutal strike, Daniel sent Thomas crashing to the ground. Grace! Thomas cried, blood staining his tunic. Run! But Daniel was already upon them. Grace clutched her daughters tightly, backing closer to the river's edge. Daniel raised his club, his shadow looming over them. If I cannot have peace, then none of you will live. In that moment, Grace made her choice. She pushed the twins into a small fisherman's canoe tied at the bank and shoved it into the current. Row, my children, she cried, though tears streamed down her face. Row with all your strength. The twins, though trembling, obeyed. The current seized the canoe and carried them swiftly downstream, away from danger. Daniel roared in fury. You dare defy me again. He raised his weapon, but before he could strike, Thomas, bleeding and broken, hurled himself at him. The two men crashed together into the river's raging waters. Grace stood on the bank, torn between fear and hope, until the river swallowed them both. When dawn broke, the storm had passed. The twins were found farther down the river by a group of fishermen, who returned them to their mother. Grace wept as she held them close, thanking heaven that her sacrifice had saved them. Thomas, however, did not return. His body was never found, though the villagers said the river had claimed him as its guardian. Daniel too was gone, lost to the same waters where he had once cast away his wife and children. Years passed, and hope and faith grew into wise, courageous women. They became leaders in their village, known for their compassion and strength. They never forgot the man who saved them, or the mother who had chosen sacrifice over despair.